Hello and welcome. Today we're diving into something that shapes our lives every single day, often without us even noticing: making a contract. You could say these agreements are the invisible engine that makes our world go round, and we're about to pop the hood and see exactly how they work.
So let me just ask you this straight up. How many contracts have you actually entered into today? Think about it. One, maybe none? Well, I'm willing to bet that the real number is way higher than you think.
Yep, that coffee you grabbed this morning, that was a contract. That bus ticket you bought, also a contract. Renewing your phone plan, ordering a pizza, even clicking subscribe on a new streaming service, every single one of those is a legally binding agreement. They're all contracts.
Which brings us to our first section, your day full of contracts. We're going to be uncovering these invisible agreements that really do shape our lives. We just don't think of them as some formal legal thing, but they are. So, what does that actually mean? What is it that turns a simple agreement into a full-blown contract? Well, at its very core, a contract is simply this: a legally binding agreement. That's the key. It's a deal between people that the courts will actually step in and enforce if one person doesn't hold up their end of the bargain.
Okay, so that leads us perfectly into our next section, the recipe for a contract. You see, for any agreement to be legally binding, it needs a few key ingredients. It's kind of like baking a cake. If you miss an ingredient, the whole thing just won't work. So let's look at what those are.
And here they are, the 4 absolute must-haves for a real contract. You need an offer, you need acceptance, you need something called consideration, and finally, you need intention. Let's break down each one.
First up is the offer. This is basically a clear proposal. So imagine you walk into a shop, you pick up a pair of trainers with a £55 price tag, and you take them to the counter. That's you making an offer to buy them for £55. Simple as that.
Next, for a contract to form, you need acceptance. Now, the key word here is unconditional. The shop has to agree to your offer exactly as it is. So when the shopkeeper takes your £55 and hands you the trainers, that's acceptance. And boom, just like that, you have a contract. Our third ingredient is consideration. Now, this sounds a bit technical, but it's really not. It just means there has to be an exchange of value. Both sides have to get something. In our little shopping trip, you get the trainers and the shop gets the money. It's a two-way street. That's consideration. And last, but definitely not least, is intention. This one is so important. Both people in the agreement have to actually intend for it to be a serious, legally binding deal. This is what separates a business contract from, say, a casual promise you make to a friend, like saying, "I'll get the next round."
And that idea of intention brings us to a really fun section, when a promise isn't. Because that one ingredient, intention, was at the very heart of this wild court case involving a promise made in a pub that was worth an absolutely mind-boggling amount of money.
The amount we're talking about, £15 million. Yeah, so the story goes. A business consultant claimed that a famous entrepreneur, Michael Ashley, promised him this massive bonus if he could double the company's share price. And here's the kicker. The promise was made over a few drinks in a pub.
So did the court make him pay up? No way. The judge threw the case out with this absolute gem of a line, saying that mere banter cannot be relied upon as the basis for a legally binding agreement.
And you have to ask, why not? Well, the court looked at the whole picture. The setting was a pub, not a boardroom. A promise of 15 million quid is, pretty extravagant. And the whole vibe, after apparently a lot of drinking, was that it was a joke. The court said no reasonable person would have thought this was a serious, legally binding offer. There was just no intention. That case is a perfect example of how much context matters. So let's move on and look at big business versus you, and dig into the different types of contracts that are out there. Because believe me, they come in all shapes and sizes.
Okay, so first, you've got formal versus informal contracts. Formal ones are the really serious deals, the ones that legally have to be in writing, like buying a house. But honestly, most of the contracts we make every day are informal. That coffee you bought, that was a spoken agreement, and it is every bit as valid in the eyes of the law. Then there's another really big difference, and it's all about who is making the deal. When you, as an individual, buy something for yourself, like a phone, that's called a consumer contract, or B2C. But when a company leases an office, that's a business-to-business contract, or B2B. And the law can treat these two situations very differently.
And all of this brings us to our final and maybe most important section, the limits of freedom. Because with all these contracts swirling around us all the time, we have to ask, is every single one of them a truly fair negotiation?
See, for a long time, the law was built on this big idea called freedom of contract. The thinking was that adults should be free to agree to whatever they want, and it wasn't the court's job to step in and save someone from a bad deal. If you made a bad bargain, well, tough luck.
But let's be real. How much freedom do you really have when you're signing up for a new phone or a social media account? You're faced with a massive wall of terms and conditions. You can't negotiate. It's a classic take-it-or-leave-it situation.
And this table just lays it all out, doesn't it? These standard, pre-written contracts are almost always one-sided. They're non-negotiable. They're packed with complex legal jargon. And at the end of the day, they put the less powerful person, that's usually us, at a clear disadvantage. That freedom to negotiate just vanishes.
Which leaves us with a pretty big question to chew on. We've seen that contracts are absolutely everywhere. They're the bedrock of how our society functions. But when you see the power imbalances that are built into so many of them, you have to wonder, if contracts are shaping our world, are they actually making it a fair one? Something to think about. Thanks for joining me.